You from my autobiography, entitled I Count My Life by Sabbaths. Part 2, My Childhood, Chapter 11, The Neighbors. The Dickies. Since we lived on a truck route, not only did we become used to the sounds of semis and jake braking, but I was never allowed to cross the street. People on that side were akin to living in another world. We would see them come and go, but from my perspective and experience, there was no interaction that I could recall. It was behind that row of houses that a vast railroad roundhouse was situated. It was large, haunting, and forbidding. I never went near it, but I could hear the sounds from it. There was only one exception regarding the other side of the street. To the west end, by the alley that split our block, a shoe repair place existed. The proprietor was known as Mr. Shoemaker. Imagine that. When I got my first two-wheeled bike, my father forbade me to ride in the street. What do you think I did the first instant I thought I could get by with it? I rode out in the street. My dad caught me almost immediately. He must have been watching. He yelled at me for a bit, and I never tried it again. The neighbor to the west of us was the Dickey family with Father Steve, Mother Mildred, the boys, Johnny, Tommy, and Steve. They were an Italian family, and on the other side of them lived Pete Dickey and his sister Helen. I learned later that Mr. Dickey's father was born in Australia, and he had another brother, Joe. I recall Pete would sit for hours shirtless in the sun, working on his tan, and I remember when Johnny, Steve Dickey's son, went off to the Korean War. He looked so handsome in his uniform, carrying his sea bag. After he left, I never saw him again until many, many years later. By then, he was married with children of his own. On warm summer days, while the cicadas sang, Steve Dickey would get out his clarinet and practice. The whole neighborhood was treated to those wonderful sounds as he played scale after scale, melody after melody. I'm not sure if he played anywhere professionally, but it was beautiful in any event. Mildred made the most delicious thick crust Italian pizza. I got a taste of it once, very tomatoey. They also had a large television, and every day after Mildred scrubbed her front porch with water and a broom, she would sit and watch soap operas. The Dickeys raised rabbits and chickens in the back of their lot. I recall the curtains of rabbit poop pellets on the back of the hutches, but I didn't dare get near that stuff. I'm sure they ate the rabbits, but I never saw them kill them. I did watch, though, as they butchered two chickens. They put the chicken neck down on a piece of wood, then they put a cardboard box over the chicken so only its head and neck were showing. The chicken's eyes blinked and the axe came down. They lifted up the box, and to my amazement, the children really did run around with their heads cut off. Tippy was the name of the Dickeys' dog. It was a black collie-like dog with a white star on its chest. I don't recall it barking a lot, but I used to pet it through the fence. When snow fell, Tommy and Stevie would throw snowballs at me. They could pack those suckers hard, and they hurt when they hit. Being much younger than they were, I was at a real disadvantage. I do recall, though, that I got in a lucky strike on Steve. My snowball hit him in the neck just above his jacket collar. I will never forget how he cried with Tommy comforting him. That was the end of the snowball fights. The Leggs. To the east of us lived Mr. and Mrs. Legg. He was a lean, mean-looking man, and she was a skinny, craven-like woman. I never saw any affection between them. He would just grunt if you said something to him. When I was about 7, my dad purchased a mongrel dog named Jerry. Poor Jerry spent most of his life chained to the fence separating our yard from the Leggs. He barked often, and my dad did all the care. This event was supposed to teach me responsibility, but it never took. Once when we went on vacation, my father asked Mr. Lake to watch Jerry. Upon our return, Jerry was dead. No food, no water. Never trust the legs. On the other side of the legs was a large blue house with a fenced-in yard. Along the front of the sidewalk was a neatly white painted post with a top rail with the fencing stapled to it. My mother cautioned that I should never, for any reason, speak to the lady who lived there. Her name was Hazel West Pinkston. She was a large woman who lived with her husband Henry. She never worked that I know of, and I remember her blue dress with white apron. She had naturally red, curly hair worn about shoulder length. I noticed her husband leave for work every day in their car, but every day at noon a taxi would arrive, and the man would go in the house for about an hour. As a little boy, I wondered if she was seeing another man besides her husband, but it turned out that her husband was a taxi driver and would come home for lunch every day in the taxi. My mother always warned us that Hazel was a witch. This is the reason I was not to have anything to do with her. I always wondered how my mother knew that, but later on in life, I learned it was indeed true. The way I learned it was through her niece, who served as my secretary for nearly 30 years in the church. I got to talking about my childhood in the office one day, and this topic came up. My secretary started laughing and told me that Aunt Hazel was a witch. In fact, Hazel had told my secretary that my secretary was gifted with special powers because she had been born with a cowl. The fact of this matter is I never felt anything dark or spooky about Hazel. She just looked like the typical grandmotherly figure who baked cookies. Between our home and the grocery store, there were a couple of more houses, but I didn't know the people who lived in them. Al Hassel ran the grocery, and I enjoyed buying candy there. Al's wife, Doris, died of cancer, and it was a very sad time for everyone. Al left the store and stayed home to care for Doris. To support himself, Al did painting of signs and lettering on vehicles, as well as becoming an artist of some renown. The church I pastored in later years features some of his work. He was a kindly man who may have helped me out of a scrape, as I'll relate next. There were a couple of apartments above the store. A very old man whose last name was French occupied one. He would descend in the evenings and walk around the store smoking a cigar. As he circled, he puffed. When he was done, he returned to his apartment until the next evening. I never gave much thought to his name, but later I learned more about my extended family and shirt-tail relatives. I discovered he was related to Dr. Frank French, who was married to Betty Hobbig, my Aunt Jean's sister. Then there was Eula French, who came to be my Sunday school teacher when I was about 12. Eula would tell about working for his father, digging out basements with a team of horses and an excavating shovel. Perhaps this old man was Frank and Eula's father. While I was walking around in my insular world, I also walked around the store. As I was going through this side yard, I spied a brown thing sitting on the top of the fence post. This 7-inch cylinder was very delicate. In fact, it snapped in two as I handled it. I quickly replaced 2 pieces on the fence post, beating a quick retreat. Later that evening, Mr. French found he had 2 short cigars rather than 1 long one. I'm not sure if Al knew about this, but if he did, he never gave my secret away, and I never went near that area again. Be sure to tune in for the next